Hey there and welcome back to another My Hero Academia video. And today I want to talk about Deku and his ridiculous quirks. Now, as you probably know if you're at all familiar with the show or the manga of My Hero Academia, you'll know that the story revolves around the character of Izuku Midoriya, a teenage boy who was powerless in a world where superpowers are commonplace and where professional heroics is a prominent and popular career path to follow, with whole high schools existing to help make this dream a reality. As he's a person without powers, it's essentially impossible for him to adequately pursue his dream of becoming the most prominent and popular hero in Japan. That is, of course, until his heroic spirit catches the eye of number one hero All Might, who has a quirk that's passed down from master to successor, with him selecting Midoriya, thus passing on his power and giving him the most busted quirk in the entire franchise, and ensuring that at some point in the future, he will indeed become the country's number one hero, just like he dreamed. And really, that's the status quo that's maintained throughout that first half of the show. He simply has All Might's busted quirk. But if that wasn't enough for you, in a dream sequence, he begins to walk down the path of unlocking the quirks of various prior users of the power. So today, I want to walk through the quirks that we're aware of from both the show and the manga, and sort of give my opinions on which ones I think are good from a story point of view, and which ones are simply bad and not well thought out. So obviously, there's going to be manga spoilers for those of you that aren't up to date with everything that's been going on, or if you only watch the show. And with all that being said, let's get into it. So we'll start with the tried and tested classic, One for All, just the standard stockpile and pass along version of the quirk. And honestly, from a narrative point of view, this quirk's great, because whilst it does give Deku a definitive power boost and lets him compete with more powerful villains as the story progresses, it also has downsides. The biggest among them being that his body simply isn't at the level it needs to be in order to properly use the quirk. So when he does end up needing to draw upon it, he fails. His body breaks. He gets badly injured. All of those good old-fashioned narrative consequences. It gives him something to struggle against and a path he needs to follow in order to become a better hero. It prevents him from becoming ridiculously overpowered too quickly like Prime All Might would have been before his gut injury, and ensures that he can have a satisfying role in the show going forward, as opposed to them needing to find stronger and stronger characters for him to fight, simply because he's too strong for the regulars. And honestly, simply based on this quirk, I think I would have been quite content with his arc through the entire show in regards to his powers, simply being him coming to terms with the strength he's been granted, and gradually being able to wield more and more, and in a more efficient manner than before, which in turn would allow him to eventually contend with some of the more powerful villains. But of course, this didn't end up happening, and we reached the singularity point, and kaboom! More quirks for Deku, which makes him even more busted than before. And look, some of these are actually legit good quirks that enhance his power set and feel like a good element to add to the narrative. But some feel like they make him too strong. So we'll go in order and start with Blackwhip. Blackwhip lets Deku eject black energy tendrils from his body, so basically he has his own personal venom symbiote. And at first, we're told as he uses it by the original user, that if you can't control your emotions, you'll lose control of this quirk. And that does happen at first. He becomes a liability to his team and destroys the class battle arena. So he couldn't control it yet. And yet within a couple of episodes, or a fair number of manga chapters, he had decent control already. Able to lift cars and the people inside, carry debris, swing around. And then by the war arc, he uses it to reinforce his arms to reduce the impact of 100% smash, and therefore his whole arm injury story thread is no longer relevant, reducing the stakes. And then he also uses it to save his allies from getting dusted, plus later he uses it to simulate 100% speed with no bodily impact along with Fajin. It feels like a lot. And look, this quirk by itself is not inherently bad for the story. I think on its own, it's just fine. Hell, if he even just had the version that the 5th user had, the weaker version, it would be fine. But since he's juiced up with One for All, so is this quirk. So the fact that he can use it to go 100% with no bodily consequences, I don't know, it just feels like it cheapens his growth quite a lot. Simply put, in conjunction with One for All, I think it's too strong for a hero that's going to be presented as an underdog in the final battle. It just doesn't make narrative sense. And then we go to Nana Shimura's quirk, Float, which, you guessed it, allows him to float. But I really don't understand why he needed this. And now it basically functions like flying at this stage in the manga. And honestly, this one's a bit of a narrative fail for me, because unlike Blackwhip, I just don't see how this is useful to the story other than making him even more OP and making it easy to avoid getting dusted. I feel like this quirk's just wholly unnecessary, and is just another get out of jail free card to make things easier for the story to progress and explain why Deku's so easily able to avoid getting killed. And it's especially egregious since All Might was basically able to float around just using the force of his quirk. So why even bother having this version? It just feels wasteful. And then we come to Smokescreen. And whilst this one's not too OP and doesn't really make Deku feel too busted, I also feel like it's another wasted opportunity. For most of his life, Deku was quirkless. He used his brain and had to analyze hero moves and support gear in order to learn and grow. But once he got his quirk, it's almost like he dialed back on that philosophy in order to emulate the All Might brute strength approach. But then he learns that he has to change up his style and relies on support gear to help him. So why not double down on that storyline and have this be support gear instead of a special snowflake added quirk? It's just a little bit frustrating that even a tiny thing like a smoke grenade is too much to ask when it would tie into his former quirkless past a lot better than suddenly having all the quirks. And then this brings us to Danger Sense, which lets Deku sense threats in the surrounding area, causing a sharp stabbing sensation due to its buff by One for All. And honestly, this one doesn't bother me. It's basically enhanced intuition, and is offset by the fact that it actively hurts him. So yeah, whilst I could probably have lived without this being in the story, I think it still has carved out a position that makes sense, and does fit in with his self-destructive tendencies when it comes to being a hero and saving people. And then this brings us to Fajin. And this quirk is just busted on its own. You build up kinetic energy by jumping around, and then you release it as an explosive burst of speed or power. Basically, Deku can now just go far beyond the limits of even his 100% One for All speed and strength just by having this quirk. And I pretty much guarantee that this is going to play a big part in him defeating the final villain, instead of him having to rely on his mind, as would make more sense for his character arc. I truly think that this is a quirk that should never have been implemented, or should have been a different character's quirk, a different hero, because in conjunction with One for All, it's way too powerful. So it'll kind of stretch belief if he is presented as some outclassed underdog. Disadvantaged maybe, but still in the same weight class as these guys. And yeah, there's one more quirk left to come, but I really feel like I need to get this out of my system. And so, that's the end of the video. And these were just my opinions. And now I'd like to hear yours. What do you think of Deku's additional quirks? Like them, hate them? Think they add a lot to the story? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.